Joel, because of what has been going on in Israel that has dominated the headlines, what has happened in Nagorno-Karabakh with almost the majority of the 120,000 people living there fleeing is no longer really in the headlines much at all. So let's dive in because I want to make sure we stay on top of this story. What can you tell us about the current situation there?
Yeah, as of 2 weeks ago, actually, virtually the entire Armenian population has left Nagorno-Karabakh. So this land that was part of the ancient Armenian Christian Homeland for thousands of years is now empty. As you said, there were probably 120,000 people there before September, before Azerbaijan attacked. Today, there's less than 40 in the whole region. That's our best estimate. So it really is a complete ethnic cleansing of the entire region. They're gone. What really concerns us now is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are still missing, and the Armenian authorities are trying to put lists together. But the evacuation was so chaotic. People were running away from bombs. People were separated. There were lots of people who had their kids in schools when the bombing started, and then their kids were taken somewhere, and they fled somewhere else, and they don't know where their kids are.
As we speak right now, there are families and children who have been still separated because of this.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And some people we know have been kidnapped and taken to Azerbaijan. There's a 68-year-old man who was actually kidnapped about a month before the attack. And he's now been put on trial in Azerbaijan for genocide, apparently because he served in the army of Nagorno-Karabakh, like every man has. So his trial just began a few days ago, and we've seen images of him sitting in a giant glass cage in the courtroom looking quite terrified. But for the rest, we don't know where they are.
So this mass exodus of almost 120,000 people, obviously flooding, I would imagine, mostly into Armenia. What is happening? I mean, this is a massive sum of people. Who is feeding them? Who is clothing them? Where are they staying? I mean, what do we know about those logistics? Because it was so chaotic and so quick.
Yeah, the logistics are a nightmare. Lots of people were and probably still are sleeping in their cars, sleeping in the open air. The Armenian government is providing some help. When I talked to one of my friends on Saturday, actually, he told me that refugees from Artsakh are getting about like $200 per person, which is not nearly enough to rent an apartment or find housing. The Armenian Red Cross is there. Armenian Caritas is there. They're doing a great job. But yeah, the needs are just completely overwhelming. Armenia's population has increased by 4% in a week. And these are all people who left everything behind, everything. So this is going to take years to get these people back on their feet.
I mean, and just so viewers and listeners understand, I mean, you think about somebody coming into your neighborhood and taking everything over. You have to leave with just what you can carry, and you've lost everything that you've worked for your entire life, and you have to go somewhere else where you haven't lived, and you have to start over again. I mean, it's unimaginable. Do we know anything about what Azerbaijan is doing with this land right now? Because now they've taken this land over, they've expelled everybody. Do we know anything about their plans, any current activities that are going on there?
Well, it's a good question, because just yesterday, the president of Azerbaijan, the dictator of Azerbaijan, made an official visit to the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh. And he has lots of photos of himself walking around the city, and the city is just empty. It's like a zombie movie or something. It's him. He's wearing a military uniform, even though he's never served a day in the military in his life. And he's just, very pleased with himself. They've renamed some streets in the capital city of Nagorno-Karabakh after the architects of the Armenian genocide of 1915. So just imagine for a moment if Germany were to conquer Israel, expel all the Jews there, and then rename the main street in Tel Aviv Adolf Hitler Street or something. I mean, it's just it's a nightmare.
I mean, you used that word before. It is a complete nightmare. It's everything you warned about for a year, you and many others. really sounding the alarm. And, we've talked about this, but the international community did very little to nothing to stop this, and didn't even really, it felt at moments, even try outside of these minor gestures to create peace talks. But this seems like it could have been something that with some pressure could have been held off a bit more. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, absolutely. I mean, well, as you say, no one really even tried. It was extremely dismaying to see. The second day of Azerbaijan's attack, the UN Security Council had a meeting about the attack, and every single member of the council stood up and said, "This attack is bad. It should stop," and then sat back down. That was it. That was the entire. That was the entire.
Well, and if you're not afraid, you're going to continue to push. It's like a child. They'll push and they'll push and they'll push until there's some form of discipline or a parent steps in to stop them. In this case, nobody stepped in to stop this. And just so people understand too, they may assume, oh, okay, great. Now these people, they've made their way into Armenia. They're going to start over and there's nothing more to worry about. But there are also fears that Armenia itself could end up coming under attack or an assault, or that more pressure could come against them. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because that's a very big piece of this puzzle that I think hasn't been given enough attention.
It is for sure. Both Turkey and Azerbaijan have a really big interest in taking southern Armenia and turning it into a corridor that will kind of link the entire Turkish Muslim world together. And Azerbaijan state propaganda says that actually all of Armenia is Azerbaijani land, and that they have to return to it. So the threat of another war is very real, especially now that the world is distracted again with the crisis in Israel. But just a few days ago, Secretary of State Blinken had a closed-door meeting with U.S. lawmakers, and he told them, yeah, we're worried about this. We think this may actually happen. And Armenia's ambassador to the European Union is expecting an attack within the next few weeks. It's hard to say, of course, whether that will actually happen, but as you said, Azerbaijan has been attacking Armenians for 7 years straight, and no one has ever imposed consequences on them for it. So why would they stop now?
Well, and when you're watching other things, when bad actors are watching things happen around the world and people are looking the other way, you start to think, oh, well, maybe I can get away with doing this thing. And when you've already gotten away with expelling 120,000 people from their homeland, the idea that you could get away with more would, I would imagine, be on the minds of some of these people in Azerbaijan who are leading the charge. Now, I have to ask you, because you are so embedded. You mentioned you were talking with a friend in recent days. You are constantly interacting with people who are really facing unimaginable consequences in this circumstance. What have been some of the most difficult or heartbreaking stories for you to hear personally?
Oh, there was a story of a 90-year-old woman who was separated from her son for 9 months by Azerbaijan's blockade. And all she really wanted to do was see her son again. And then the war happened in September, and she was evacuated, and she made it all the way to Armenia and saw him and hugged him and died shortly thereafter.
Wow.
There's a village in Nagorno-Karabakh called Sarnagbur that only had 75 people in it. And when the attack started, the mayor tried to gather all of the people of the town under a clump of trees behind some buildings so that they could be safe from the shelling and then find a way to escape. And Azerbaijan apparently saw them there and bombed that spot. So I've seen a video of a 7-year-old boy named Gurgen telling the story of how all of a sudden the world just blew up around him, and his aunt was killed. Adults around him were killed. He was wounded very badly in his leg and his arm. 7-year-old boy. But he was able to bring his little brother and his little sister out of there into a truck and get them to safety. Remember, this is 120,000 people. It's a lot in a way, but in another way, it's a community where everyone knows each other, right? Everyone in this community knows someone who was killed when Azerbaijan attacked last month. Everyone.
It's traumatic. I mean, it's traumatic on so many on so many levels, from the having to move away from the loss of life, from knowing that this, homeland has been taken away. And the other part that you and I have spoken about in the past, but I think it's worth bringing up here, Christian heritage. There are so many sites within Nagorno-Karabakh that that tie back to early Christian years when the church was just beginning, and even the early hundreds, in the years of the church there. So that's a whole other piece. I mean, are these going to be things that are still standing under Azerbaijan, do you think?
Um, they might still be standing. They might be destroyed. But if they're standing, it will be because Azerbaijan has successfully falsified their history. Azerbaijan has been promoting a narrative that everything Armenian in the region is actually ancient Azerbaijani, back when the Azerbaijanis were Christians. And this is the whole. So they've been going around like sanding off Armenian inscriptions, destroying any sign that these churches and these monasteries once belonged to the Armenian people or the Armenian church. So if they survived, it will be because they've successfully falsified their history, but they may just destroy a lot of them. They've destroyed several churches that they conquered in 2020. In the region of Nakhichevan, they bulldozed every single church from 1700 years of Armenian history there. So we'll have to see what happens.
Just as we round out to a close here, because we want to make sure we stay on top of this story again, and that we are not letting this slip away, because it's a very important story that affects a lot of people. In light of this situation not going the way that you had hoped and prayed and worked so hard for, what gives you continued hope to keep pressing on? Because you have a difficult job, and yet you keep moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it really helps to be a Christian. It's as simple as that sometimes, that we know that this is not the end. When I was growing up, I really loved the Chronicles of Narnia, and there's a wonderful line from the last book where they get to heaven and they discover that England is in heaven too, and it looks just like the England that they left behind, the children, but everything that was destroyed in England is still there in the real England, in the new creation. So maybe that sounds funny, but I've gotten some hope out of that idea that nothing good is ever actually destroyed forever, because we do have a God who's faithful, and we do have a new creation coming, and we move on to the next fight, and the next struggle.
Well, and that's the hope. It doesn't sound funny at all. It sounds incredible and in line with what we are told is true and what we believe as Christians. So I appreciate you taking the time, as always, bringing us through this, and we'll continue to check in with you as the story develops.
Great. Thank you, Billy.